August 16th, 1661. At the office all the morning, though little to be done because all our clerks are gone to the burial of Tom, Whitton, one of the controller's clerks, a very ingenious and a likely young man to live as any in the office. But it is such a sickly time, both in city and country everywhere, of a sort of fever, that never was heard of almost, unless it was in a plague time. Among others, the famous Tom. Fuller is dead of it, and Dr. Nichols, Dean of Paul's, and my Lord General Monk is very dangerous ill. Dined at home with the children and were merry, and my father with me. October 31st, 1663. The Queen continues lightheaded, but in hopes to recover. The plague is much in Amsterdam, and we in fears of it here, which God defend. The Turk goes on mightily in the Emperor's dominions, and the princes cannot agree among themselves how to go against him. November 26th. The plague, it seems, grows more and more at Amsterdam, and we are going upon making of all ships coming from thence and Hambro, or any other infected places, to perform their quarantine, for 30 days, as Sir R.D. Brown expressed it in the order of the Council, contrary to the import of the word. Though in the general acceptation, it signifies now the thing, not the time spent in doing it, in Holehaven, a thing never done by us before. May 4th, 1664. Thence to the coffee house and to the Change a while. News uncertain how the Dutch proceed, some say for, some say against a war. The plague increases at Amsterdam. So home to dinner, and after dinner to my office, where very late, till my eyes, which begin to fail me nowadays by candlelight, begin to trouble me. Home at night to supper and to bed. July 25th. Thence back again homewards, and Sir W. Batten and I to the coffee house, but no news, only the plague is very hot still, and increases among the Dutch. August 3rd. Thence to Whitehall to meet with Sir G. Carteret about hiring some ground to make our mast dock at Deptford, but being council morning failed, but met with Mr. Coventry, and he and I discoursed of the likeliness of a Dutch war, which I think is very likely now, for the Dutch do prepare a fleet to oppose us at Guinea, and he do think we shall, though neither of us have a mind to it, fall into it of a sudden, and yet the plague do increase among them, and is got into their fleet, and Opdam's own ship, which makes it strange they should be so high. September 24th. We were told today of a Dutch ship of 300 or 400 tons, where all the men were dead of the plague, and the ship cast ashore at Gothenburg. April 30th, 1665. In much trouble as to the pains I have taken and the rubs I expect yet to meet with about the business of Tangier. The fleet, with about 106 ships, upon the coast of Holland, in sight of the Dutch within the Texel. Great fears of the sickness here in the city, it being said that 2 or 3 houses are already shut up. God preserve us all. May 24th. Up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and with W. Hewer there till 12 without intermission, putting some papers in order. Thence to the coffee house with Creed, where I have not been a great while, where all the news is of the Dutch being gone out, and of the plague growing upon us in this town, and of remedies against it, some saying one thing, some another. June 8th. Alone at home to dinner, my wife, mother, and Mercer dining at W. Joyce's, I giving her a caution to go round by the half-moon to his house, because of the plague. June 10th. In the evening home to supper, and there, to my great trouble, hear that the plague is come into the city, though it hath these 3 or 4 weeks since its beginning been wholly out of the city. But where should it begin but in my good friend and neighbours, Dr. Burnet, in Fanchurch Street, which in both points troubles me mightily. To the office to finish my letters and then home to bed, being troubled at the sickness, and my head filled also with other business enough, and particularly how to put my things and estate in order, in case it should please God to call me away, which God dispose of to his glory. June 15th. The town grows very sickly, and people to be afeard of it. They are dying this last week of the plague 112, from 43 the week before, whereof but one in Fanchurch Street, and one in Broad Street, by the treasurer's office. June 17th. It struck me very deep this afternoon going with a hackney coach from my Lord Treasurer's down Holborn. The coachman I found to drive easily, at last stood still, and come down hardly able to stand, and told me that he was suddenly struck very sick, and almost blind. He could not see. So I light and went into another coach, with a sad heart for the poor man and trouble for myself, lest he should have been struck with the plague, being at the end of the town that I took him up. But God have mercy upon us all. June 20th. This day I informed myself that there died 4 or 5 at Westminster of the plague in one alley in several houses upon Sunday last, Bell Alley, over against the Palace Gate. Yet people do think that the number will be fewer in the town than it was the last week. June 23rd. So home by hackney coach, which has become a very dangerous passage nowadays, the sickness increasing mightily, and to bed. June 26th. The plague increases mightily. I this day seeing a house at a bitmaker's over against St. Clement's Church, in the open street, shut up, which is a sad sight. June 28th. After dinner to Whitehall, thinking to speak with my Lord Ashley, but failed, and I whiled away some time in Westminster Hall against he did come, in my way observing several plague houses in King Street and near the palace. Here I hear Miss Martin is gone out of town, and that her husband, an idle fellow, is since come out of France, as he pretends, but I believe not that he hath been. I was fearful of going to any house, but I did to the Swan, and thence to Whitehall, giving the waterman a shilling, because a young fellow and belonging to the Plymouth. June 29th. This end of the town every day grows very bad of the plague. The mortality bill is come to 267, which is about 99 more than the last, and of these but 4 in the city, which is a great blessing to us. June 30th. Thus this book of 2 years ends, myself and family in good health, consisting of myself and wife, Mercer, her woman, Mary, Alice, and Susan, our maids, and Tom, my boy, in a sickly time of the plague growing on, having upon my hands the troublesome care of the treasury of Tangier, with great sums drawn upon me, and nothing to pay them with. Also the business of the office great. Consideration of removing my wife to Woolwich, she lately busy in learning to paint, with great pleasure and success. July 1st. Thence I to Westminster, where I hear the sickness increases greatly. Thence by coach, and late at the office, and so to bed, sad at the news that 7 or 8 houses in Basinghall Street are shut up of the plague. July 5th. From thence walked round to Whitehall, the park being quite locked up, and I observed a house shut up this day in the Pall Mall, where heretofore in Cromwell's time we young men used to keep our weekly clubs. Being come to Deptford, my lady not being within, we parted, and I by water to Woolwich, where I found my wife come, and her 2 maids, and very prettily accommodated they will be, and I left them going to supper, grieved in my heart to part with my wife, being worse by much without her, though some trouble there is in having the care of a family at home in this plague time, and so took leave, and I in one boat, and W. Hewer in another home very late, first against tide, we having walked in the dark to Greenwich. Late home and to bed, very lonely. July 9th. About 3 o'clock I, leaving my wife there, took boat and home, and there shifted myself into my black silk suit, and having promised Harmon yesterday, I to his house, which I find very mean, and mean company. His wife very ill, I could not see her. Here I, with her father, and Kate Joyce, who was also very ill, were godfathers and godmother to his boy, and was christened Will. Mr. Meryton christened him. The most observable thing I found there to my content was to hear him and his clerk tell me that in this parish of Michel's, Cornhill, one of the middlemost parishes, and a great one of the town, there hath, notwithstanding this sickliness, been buried of any disease, man, woman, or child, not one for 13 months last past, which is very strange, and the like in a good degree in most other parishes, I hear, saving only of the plague in them, but in this neither the plague nor any other disease. July 10th. Here though I have not been in many years, yet I lack time to stay. Besides that it is, I perceive, an unpleasing thing to be at court, everybody being fearful one of another, and all so sad, inquiring after the plague, so that I stole away by my horse to Kingston, and there with trouble was forced to press 2 sturdy rogues to carry me to London, and met at the waterside with Mr. Charnock, Sir Philip Warwick's clerk, who had been in company and was quite foxed. July 11th. At 6 o'clock up and to Westminster, where, and all the town besides, I hear, the plague increases, and, it being too soon to go to the Duke of Albemarle, I to the Harp and Ball, and there made a bargain with Mary to go forth with me in the afternoon, which she with much ado consented to. July 12th. After doing what business I could in the morning, it being a solemn fast day for the plague growing upon us, I took boat and down to Deptford, where I stood with great pleasure an hour or two by my Lady Sandwich's bedside, talking to her, she lying prettily in bed. July 13th. Lay long, being sleepy, and then up to the office, my Lord Brunker, after his sickness, being come to the office, and did what business there was, and so I by water, at night late, to Sir G. Carteret's. Above 700 dead of the plague this week. July 17th. So anon I took leave, and for London. But Lord, to see among other things, how all these great people here are afeard of London, being doubtful of anything that comes from thence, or that hath lately been there, that I was forced to say that I lived wholly at Woolwich. Here Sir G. Carteret would have me lie all night, which I did most nobly, better than ever I did in my life, Sir G. Carteret being mighty kind to me, leading me to my chamber, and all their care now is to have the business ended, and they have reason, because the sickness puts all out of order, and they cannot safely stay where they are. July 18th. I was much troubled this day to hear at Westminster how the officers do bury the dead in the open Tuttle fields, pretending want of room elsewhere, whereas the new chapel churchyard was walled in at the public charge in the last plague time, merely for want of room, and now none but such as are able to pay dear for it can be buried there. July 20th. So walked to Redriff, where I hear the sickness is, and indeed is scattered almost everywhere, there dying 1,089 of the plague this week. My Lady Carteret did this day give me a bottle of plague water to take home with me. So home to write letters late, and then home to bed, where I have not lain these 3 or 4 nights. July 21st. So home and late at my chamber, setting some papers in order, the plague growing very raging, and my apprehensions of it great, so very late to bed. July 22nd. Thence I by water to Westminster, and the Duke of Albemarle being gone to dinner to my Lord of Canterbury's, I thither, and there walked and viewed the new hall, a new old-fashioned hall as much as possible, begun, and means left for the ending of it, by Bishop Juxon, not coming proper to speak with him, I to Foxhall, where to the Spring Garden, but I do not see one guest there, the town being so empty of anybody to come thither. Only, while I was there, a poor woman come to scold with the master of the house that a kinswoman, I think, of hers, that was newly dead of the plague, might be buried in the churchyard, for her part, she should not be buried in the commons, as they said she should. Back to Whitehall, and by comes the Duke of Albemarle, and there, after a little discourse, I by coach home, not meeting with but 2 coaches, and but 2 carts from Whitehall to my own house, that I could observe, and the streets mighty thin of people. I met this noon with Dr. Burnett, who told me, and I find in the newsbook this week that he posted upon the Change, that whoever did spread the report that, instead of the plague, his servant was by him killed, it was forgery, and shewed me the acknowledgment of the master of the pest house, that his servant died of the bubbo on his right groin, and 2 spots on his right thigh, which is the plague. July 25th. At noon to the Change, which was very thin, and thence homeward, and was called in by Mr. Rawlinson, with whom I dined and some good company very harmlessly merry. But sad the story of the plague in the city, it growing mightily. This day my Lord Brunker did give me Mr. Grant's book upon the bills of mortality, new printed and enlarged. Thence to my office a while, full of business, and thence by coach to the Duke of Albemarle's, not meeting one coach going nor coming from my house thither and back again, which is very strange. These 2 or 3 days Mr. Shaw at Alderman Backwell's hath lain sick, lie to die, and is feared will not live a day to an end. July 26th. This day poor Robin Shaw at Backwell's died, and Backwell himself now in Flanders. The king himself asked about Shaw, and being told he was dead, said he was very sorry for it. The sickness is got into our parish this week, and is got indeed everywhere, so that I begin to think of setting things in order, which I pray God enable me to put, both as to soul and body. July 27th. At home met the weekly bill, where above 1,000 increased in the bill, and of them in all about 1,700 of the plague, which hath made the officers this day resolve of sitting at Deptford, which puts me to some consideration what to do. Therefore home to think and consider of everything about it, and without determining anything, eat a little supper and to bed, full of the pleasure of these 6 or 7 last days. July 31st. Anon the coach comes. In the meantime there coming a news thither with his horse to go over, that told us he did come from Islington this morning, and that Proctor the vintner of the Mitre in Wood Street and his son are dead this morning there, of the plague, he having laid out abundance of money there, and was the greatest vintner for some time in London for great entertainments. Thus we end this month, as I said, after the greatest glut of content that I ever had, only under some difficulty because of the plague, which grows mightily upon us, the last week being about 1,700 or 1,800 of the plague. My Lord Sandwich at sea, with a fleet of about 100 sail, to the northward, expecting De Ruyter or the Dutch East India fleet. My Lord Hinchingbroke coming over from France, and will meet his sister at Scots Hall. Myself having obliged both these families in this business very much, as both my lady and Sir G. Carteret and his lady do confess exceedingly, and the latter do also now call me cousin, which I am glad of. So God preserve us all friends long, and continue health among us. August 2nd. Up, it being a public fast, as being the first Wednesday of the month, for the plague. I within doors all day, and upon my monthly accounts late, I did find myself really worth £1,900, for which the great God of heaven and earth be praised. August 3rd. Up, and betimes to Deptford to Sir G. Carteret's, where, not liking the horse that had been hired by Mr. Outhwaite for me, I did desire Sir G. Carteret to let me ride his new 40L horse, which he did, and so I left my hackney equals an ambling nag fitted for ladies' riding, behind, and so after staying a good while in their bedchamber while they were dressing themselves, discoursing merrily, I parted and to the ferry, where I was forced to stay a great while before I could get my horse brought over, and then mounted and rode very finely to Dagenham's. All the way people, citizens, walking to and again to inquire how the plague is in the city this week by the bill, which by chance, at Greenwich, I had heard was 2,020 of the plague, and 3,000 and odd of all diseases. But methought it was a sad question to be so often asked me. Coming to Dagenham's, I there met our company coming out of the house, having stayed as long as they could for me, so I let them go a little before, and went and took leave of my Lady Sandwich, good woman, who seems very sensible of my service in this late business, and having her directions in some things, to get Sir G. Carteret and my lord to settle the portion, and what Sir G. Carteret is to settle, into land, soon as may be, she not liking that it should lie long undone, for fear of death on either side. So took leave of her, and then down to the buttery, and eat a piece of cold venison pie, and drank and took some bread and cheese in my hand, and so mounted after them, Mr. Marr very kindly staying to lead me the way. By and by met my Lord Crewe returning, after having accompanied them a little way, and so after them, Mr. Marr telling me by the way how a maidservant of Mr. John Wright's, who lives thereabouts, falling sick of the plague, she was removed to an outhouse, and a nurse appointed to look to her, who, being once absent, the maid got out of the house at the window and run away. The nurse coming and knocking, and having no answer, believed she was dead, and went and told Mr. Wright so, who and his lady were in great strait what to do to get her buried. At last resolved to go to Burntwood hard by, being in the parish, and there get people to do it. But they would not, so he went home full of trouble, and in the way met the wench walking over the common, which frighted him worse than before, and was forced to send people to take her, which he did, and they got one of the pest coaches and put her into it to carry her to a pest house. And passing in a narrow lane, Sir Anthony Brown, with his brother and some friends in the coach, met this coach with the curtains drawn close. the brother being a young man and believing there might be some lady in it that would not be seen, and the way being narrow, he thrust his head out of his own into her coach, and to look, and there saw somebody look very ill, and in a sick dress, and stunk mightily, which the coachman also cried out upon. And presently they come up to some people that stood looking after it, and told our gallants that it was a maid of Mr. Wright's carried away sick of the plague, which put the young gentleman into a fright, had almost cost him his life, but is now well again. August 10th. By and by to the office, where we sat all morning, in great trouble to see the bill this week rise so high, to above 4,000 in all, and of them above 3,000 of the plague, and an odd story of Alderman Bence's stumbling at night over a dead corpse in the street, and going home and telling his wife, she at the fright, being with child, fell sick and died of the plague. Thence to the office and, after writing letters, home, to draw over anew my will, which I had bound myself by oath to dispatch by tomorrow night, the town growing so unhealthy that a man cannot depend upon living 2 days to an end. August 15th. Up by 4 o'clock and walked to Greenwich, where called at Captain Cox and to his chamber, but being in bed, where something put my last night's dream into my head, which I think is the best that ever was dreamed, which was, that I had my Lady Castlemaine in my arms and was admitted to use all the dalliance I desired with her, and then dreamed that this could not be awake, but that it was only a dream, but that since it was a dream, and that I took so much real pleasure in it, what a happy thing it would be, if when we are in our graves, as Shakespeare resembles it, we could dream, and dream but such dreams as this, that then we should not be so fearful of death as we are this plague time. It was dark before I could get home, and so land at Churchyard Stairs, where, to my great trouble, I met a dead corpse of the plague, in the narrow alley just bringing down a little pair of stairs, but I thank God I was not much disturbed at it. However, I shall beware of being laid abroad again. August 18th. Thence, in Commissioner Pett's coach, leaving them there, I late in the dark to Gravesend, where great is the plague, and I troubled to stay there so long for the tide. At 10 at night, having supped, I took boat alone, and slept well all the way to the Tower Dock, about 3 o'clock in the morning, so knocked up my people and to bed. August 20th. I had thoughts of going home by water, and of seeing Windsor Chapel and Castle, but finding at my coming in that Sir G. Carteret did prevent me in speaking for my sudden return to look after business, I did presently eat a bit off the spit about 10 o'clock, and so took horse for Staines, and thence to Brainford to Mr. Povy's, the weather being very pleasant to ride in. Mr. Povey not being at home, I lost my labour, only eat and drank there with his lady, and told my bad news, and here the plague is round about them there. So away to Brainford, and there at the inn that goes down to the waterside, I light and paid off my post horses, and so slipped on my shoes and laid my things by, the tide not serving, and to church, where a dull sermon, and many Londoners. After church to my inn, and eat and drank, and so about 7 o'clock by water, and got between 9 and 10 to Queenhive, very dark. And I could not get my watermen to go elsewhere for fear of the plague. Thence with a lanthorn, in great fear of meeting of dead corpses, carried to be buried, but, blessed be God, met none, but did see now and then a link, which is the mark of them, at a distance. So got safe home about 10 o'clock, my people not all abed, and after supper I weary to bed. August 21st. Thence walked, it being now dark, to Sir James Minns, and there stayed at the door talking with him an hour, while messengers went to get a boat for me, to carry me to Woolwich, but all to no purpose, so I was forced to walk it in the dark, at 10 o'clock at night, with Sir G. Minns George with me, being mightily troubled for fear of the dogs at Coombe Farm, and more for fear of rogues by the way, and yet more because of the plague which is there, which is very strange, it being a single house, all alone from the town, but it seems they used to admit beggars, for their own safety, to lie in their barns, and they brought it to them. But I bless God, I got about 11 of the clock well to my wife, and giving 4s in recompense to George, I to my wife, and having first viewed her last piece of drawing since I saw her, which is 7 or 8 days, which pleases me beyond anything in the world, to bed with great content but weary. August 22nd. Up, and after much pleasant talk, and being importuned by my wife and her 2 maids, which are both good wenches, for me to buy a necklace of pearl for her, and I promising to give her one of 60L in 2 years at furthest, and in less if she pleases me in her painting, I went away and walked to Greenwich, in my way seeing a coffin with a dead body therein, dead of the plague, lying in an open close belonging to Coombe Farm, which was carried out last night, and the parish have not appointed anybody to bury it, but only set a watch there day and night, that nobody should go thither or come thence, which is a most cruel thing, this disease making us more cruel to one another than if we are dogs. Thence I to Deptford, where by appointment I find Mr. Andrews come, and to the Globe, where we dined together and did much business as to our Plymouth gentleman, and after a good dinner and good discourse, he being a very good man, I think verily, we parted, and I to the King's Yard, walked up and down, and by out at the back gate, and there saw the Bagwell's wife's mother and daughter, and went to them, and went into the daughter's house with the mother, and drinking and talking by and by away, and so walked to Redriff, troubled to go through the little lane, where the plague is, but did and took water and home, where all well. August 25th. This day I am told that Dr. Burnett, my physician, is this morning dead of the plague, which is strange, his man dying so long ago, and his house this month open again, now himself dead. Poor unfortunate man. August 26th. Thence I by water home, in my way seeing a man taken up dead out of the hold of a small ketch that lay at Deptford. I doubt it might be the plague, which, with the thought of Dr. Burnett, did something disturb me, so that I did not what I intended and should have done at the office as to business, but home sooner than ordinary, and after supper to read Melancholy alone, and then to bed. August 29th. In the morning waking, among other discourse, my wife begun to tell me the difference between her and Mercer, and that it was only from restraining her to gad abroad to some Frenchmen that were in the town, which I do not wholly yet in part believe, and for my quiet would not inquire into it. So rose and dressed myself, and away by land, walking a good way, then remembered that I had promised Commissioner Pett to go with him in his coach, and therefore I went back again to him, and so by his coach to Greenwich, and called at Sir Theophilus Biddulph's, a sober, discreet man, to discourse of the preventing of the plague in Greenwich, and Woolwich, and Deptford, where in every place it begins to grow very great. August 30th. Up betimes and to my business of settling my house and papers, and then abroad and met with Hadley, our clerk, who, upon my asking how the plague goes, he told me it increases much, and much in our parish, for, says he, there died 9 this week, though I have returned but 6, which is a very ill practice, and makes me think it is so in other places, and therefore the plague much greater than people take it to be. Thence walked towards Moorfields to see, God forbid my presumption, whether I could see any dead corpse going to the grave, but, as God would have it, did not. But Lord, how every body's looks, and discourse in the street is of death, and nothing else, and few people going up and down, that the town is like a place distressed and forsaken. August 31st. Up, and after putting several things in order to my removal to Woolwich, the plague having a great increase this week, beyond all expectation of almost 2,000, making the general bill 7,000, odd 100, and the plague above 6,000. Thus this month ends, with great sadness upon the public through the greatness of the plague, everywhere through the kingdom almost. Every day sadder and sadder news of its increase. In the city died this week 7,496, and of them 6,102 of the plague, but it is feared that the true number of the dead this week is near 10,000, partly from the poor that cannot be taken notice of through the greatness of the number, and partly from the Quakers and others that will not have any bell ring for them. As to myself, I am very well, only in fear of the plague, and as much of an egg, by being forced to go early and late to Woolwich, and my family to lie there continually. September 3rd, Lord's Day. Up and put on my coloured silk suit, very fine, and my new periwig, bought a good while since, but darst not wear it because the plague was in Westminster when I bought it, and it is a wonder what will be the fashion after the plague is done as to periwigs, for nobody will dare to buy any hair for fear of the infection, that it had been cut off the heads of people dead of the plague. I took my Lady Pen home and her daughter Peg, and merry we were, and after dinner I made my wife show them her pictures, which did mad Peg Pen, who learns of the same man, and cannot do so well. After dinner left them, and I by water to Greenwich, where much ado to be suffered to come into the town because of the sickness, for fear I should come from London, till I told them who I was. Church being done, my Lord Brouncker, Sir J. Menz, and I up to the vestry at the desire of the justices of the peace, Sir T.H. Biddulph and Sir W. Borman and A.L.D. Hooker, in order to the doing something for the keeping of the plague from growing, but Lord, to consider the madness of people of the town, who will, because they are forbid, come in crowds along with the dead corpse to see them buried. But we agreed on some orders for the prevention thereof. Among other stories, one was very passionate, methought, of a complaint brought against a man in the town for taking a child from London from an infected house. A.L.D. Hooker told us it was the child of a very able citizen in Gracious Street, a saddler, who had buried all the rest of his children of the plague, and himself and wife, now being shut up, and in despair of escaping, did desire only to save the life of this little child, and so prevailed to have it received stark naked into the arms of a friend, who brought it, having put it into new fresh clothes, to Greenwich, where, upon hearing the story, we did agree it should be permitted to be received and kept in the town. September 4th. Writing letters all the morning, among others to my Lady Carteret, the first I have wrote to her, telling her the state of the city as to health and other sorrowful stories, and thence after dinner to Greenwich, to Sir J. Minns, where I found my Lord Brunker, and having stayed our hour for the justices by agreement, the time being past, we to walk in the park with Mr. Hammond and Turner, and there eat some fruit out of the King's garden, and walked in the park, and so back to Sir J. Minns, and thence walked home, my Lord Brunker giving me a very neat cane to walk with. But it troubled me to pass by Coombe Farm, where about 21 people have died of the plague, and 3 or 4 days since I saw a dead corpse in a coffin lie in the close unburied, and a watch is constantly kept there night and day to keep the people in, the plague making us cruel, as dogs, one to another. September 6th. Busy all the morning writing letters to several, so to dinner, to London to pack up more things thence, and there I looked into the street and saw fires burning in the street, as it is through the whole city by the Lord Mayor's order. Thence by water to the Duke of Albemarle, all the way fires on each side the Thames, and strange to see in broad daylight 2 or 3 burials upon the bankside, one at the very heels of another, doubtless all of the plague, and yet at least 40 or 50 people going along with every one of them. September 7th, up by 5 of the clock, mighty full of fear of an ague, but was obliged to go, and so by water, wrapping myself up warm, to the Tower, and there sent for the weekly bill, and find 8,252 dead in all, and of them 6,978 of the plague, which is a most dreadful number, and shows reason to fear that the plague hath got that hold that it will yet continue among us. September 8th. I was in great trouble all this day for my boy Tom, who went to Greenwich yesterday by my order, and come not home till tonight for fear of the plague, but he did come home tonight, saying he stayed last night by Mr. Hayter's advice, hoping to have called me as I come home with my boat to come along with me. September 9th. At noon by invitation to my Lord Brunker's, all of us, to dinner, where a good venison pastry and mighty merry. Here was Sir W. Doyley, lately come from Ipswich, about the sick and wounded, and Mr. Eveling and Captain Cock. My Lord Chancellor, he minds getting of money and nothing else, and my Lord Ashley will rob the devil and the altar, but he will get money if it be to be got. But that puts us into this great melancholy was news brought today, which Captain Cock reports as a certain truth, that all the Dutch fleet, men of war and merchant East India ships, are got every one in from Bergen the 3rd of this month, Sunday last, which will make us all ridiculous. The fleet came home with shame to require a great deal of money, which is not to be had, to discharge many men, that must get the plague then or continue at greater charge on shipboard. Nothing done by them to encourage the Parliament to give money, nor the kingdom able to spare any money if they would, at this time of the plague. So that as things look at present, the whole state must come to ruin, full of these melancholy thoughts, to bed, where though I lay the saftest I ever did in my life, with a down bed, after the Danish manner, upon me, yet I slept very ill, chiefly through the thoughts of my Lord Sandwich's concernment in all this ill success at sea. September 10th, Lord's Day. Walked home, being forced thereto by one of my watermen falling sick yesterday, and it was God's great mercy I did not go by water with them yesterday, for he fell sick on Saturday night, and it is to be feared of the plague, so I sent him away to London with his fellow. But another boat come to me this morning, whom I sent to Blackwall for Mr. Andrews. I walked to Woolwich, and there find Mr. Hill, and he and I all the morning at music and a song he hath set of 3 parts, methinks, very good. Anon comes Mr. Andrews, though it be a very ill day, and so after dinner we to music and sang till about 4 or 5 o'clock, it blowing very hard, and now and then raining, and wind and tide being against us. Andrews and I took leave and walked to Greenwich. My wife, before I come out, telling me the ill news that she hears that her father is very ill, and then I told her I feared of the plague, for that the house is shut up. And so she much troubled she did desire me to send them something, and I said I would, and will do so. September 14th, and having taken a copy of my lord's letter, I away back again to the Bear at the bridge foot, being full of wind and out of order, and there called for a biscuit and a piece of cheese and gill of sack, being forced to walk over the bridge toward the change, and the plague being all thereabouts. Here my news was highly welcome, and I did wonder to see the change so full, I believe 200 people, but not a man or merchant of any fashion, but plain men all. And Lord, to see how I did endeavour all I could to talk with as few as I could, there being now no observation of shutting up of houses infected, that to be sure we do converse and meet with people that have the plague upon them. Down to the office, and there wrote letters to and again about this good news of our victory, and so by water home late, where when I came home I spent some thoughts upon the occurrences of this day, giving matter for as much content on one hand and melancholy on another as any day in all my life. For the first, the finding of my money and plate and all safe at London, and speeding in my business of money this day. The hearing of this good news to such excess after so great a despair of my lord's doing anything this year, adding to that the decrease of 500 and more, which is the first decrease we have yet had in the sickness since it begun, and great hopes that the next week it will be greater. Then on the other side, my finding that though the bill in general is abated, yet the city within the walls is increased and likely to continue so, and is close to our house there. My meeting dead corpse of the plague, carried to be buried close to me at noonday through the city in Fanchurch Street. To see a person sick of the sores, carried close by me by Grace Church in a hackney coach. My finding the Angel Tavern, at the lower end of Tower Hill, shut up, and more than that, the alehouse at the Tower Stairs. And more than that, the person was then dying of the plague when I was last there, a little while ago at night, to write a short letter there, and I overheard the mistress of the house sadly saying to her husband somebody was very ill, but did not think it was of the plague. To hear that poor Payne, my waterman, hath buried a child and is dying himself. To hear that a labourer I sent but the other day to Dagenham's to know how they did there is dead of the plague, and that one of my own watermen, that carried me daily, fell sick as soon as he landed me on Friday morning last, when I had been all night upon the water, and I believed he did get his infection that day at Brainford, is now dead of the plague. To hear that Captain Lambert and Cuttle are killed in the taking these ships, and that Mr. Sidney Montague is sick of a desperate fever at my Lady Carteret's at Scott's Hall. To hear that Mr. Lewes hath another daughter sick, and lastly, that both my servants, W. Hewers and Tom Edwards, have lost their fathers, both in St. Sepulchre's parish, of the plague this week, doth put me into great apprehensions of melancholy, and with good reason. But I put off the thoughts of sadness as much as I can, and the rather to keep my wife in good heart, and family also. After supper, having eat nothing all day, upon a fine tench of Mr. Sheldon's taking, we to bed. September 15th. Up, it being a cold, mizzling morning, and so by water to the office, where very busy upon several businesses. Then to my business again, and by sent my waterman to see how W. Warren doth, who is sick, and for which I have reason to be very sorry, he being the friend I have got most by of most friends in England but the king, who returns me that he is pretty well again, his disease being an ague. I by water to Deptford, thinking to have seen my Valentine, but I could not, and so come back again, and to the office, where a little business, and thence to Captain Cock, and there drank a cup of good drink, which I am fain to allow myself during this plague time, by advice of all, and not contrary to my oath, my physician being dead, and chirurgeon out of the way, whose advice I am obliged to take. And so by water home, and eat my supper, and so to bed, being in much pain to think what I shall do this winter time, for go every day to Woolwich I cannot, without endangering my life, and staying from my wife at Greenwich is not handsome. September 16th. At noon to dinner to my Lord Brunker,
where Sir W. Batten and his lady came by invitation, and very merry we are, only that the discourse of the likelihood of the increase of the plague this week makes us a little sad. September 18th. I hear by everybody how much my poor Lord of Sandwich was concerned for me during my silence a while, lest I had been dead of the plague in this sickly time. At Commissioner Pett's we did eat and drink very well, and very merry we were, and about 10 at night, it being moonshine and very cold, we set out, his coach carrying us, and so all night travelled to Greenwich, we sometimes sleeping a little, and then talking and laughing by the way, and with much pleasure, but that it was horribly cold, that I was afeard of an ague. September 20th, called up by Captain Cock, who was last night put into great trouble upon his boys being rather worse than better, upon which he removed him out of his house to his stable, who told me that to my comfort his boy was now as well as ever he was in his life. So I up, and after being trimmed, the first time I have been touched by a barber these 12 months, I think, and more, went to Sir J. Minns, where I find all out of order still, they having not seen one another till by and by Sir J. Minns and Sir W. Batten met, to go into my Lord Brunker's coach, and so we four to Lambeth, and thence to the Duke of Albemarle, to inform him what we have done as to the fleet, which is very little, and to receive his direction. But Lord, what a sad time it is to see no boats upon the river, and grass grows all up and down Whitehall Court, and nobody but poor wretches in the streets. And, which is worst of all, the Duke showed us the number of the plague this week, brought in the last night from the Lord Mayor, that it is increased about 600 more than the last, which is quite contrary to all our hopes and expectations, from the coldness of the late season. For the whole general number is 8,297, and of them the plague 7,165, which is more in the whole by above 50 than the biggest bill yet, which is very grievous to us all. September 21st, up between 5 and 6 o'clock, and by the time I was ready, my lord's coach comes for me, and taking Will Hewer with me, who is all in mourning for his father, who is lately dead of the plague, as my boy Tom's is also, I set out, and took about 100 L with me to pay the fees there, and so rode in some fear of robbing. I got to my Lord Brunker's before night, and there I sat and supped with him and his mistress, and Cock, whose boy is yet ill. September 24th, by and by to dinner about 3 o'clock, and then I in the cabin to writing down my journal for these last 7 days, to my great content, it having pleased God that in this sad time of the plague, everything else hath conspired to my happiness and pleasure, more for these last 3 months than in all my life before in so little time. God long preserve it, and make me thankful for it. September 29th. I hear for certain this night upon the road that Sir Martin Noel is this day dead of the plague in London, where he hath lain sick of it these 8 days. September 30th. The great burden we have upon us at this time at the office is the providing for prisoners and sick men that are recovered, they lying before our office doors all night and all day, poor wretches. Having been on shore, the captains won't receive them on board, and other ships we have not to put them on, nor money to pay them off or provide for them. God remove this difficulty. I do end this month with the greatest content, and may say that these last 3 months, for joy, health, and profit, have been much the greatest that ever I received in all my life in any 12 months almost in my life, having nothing upon me but the consideration of the sickliness of the season during this great plague to mortify me, for all which the Lord God be praised.
October 3rd. This night I hear that of our 2 watermen that used to carry our letters, and were well on Saturday last, one is dead, and the other is dying sick of the plague. The plague, though decreasing elsewhere, yet being greater about the Tower and thereabouts. October 4th. This night comes Sir George Smith to see me at the office, and tells me how the plague is decreased this week 740, for which God be praised, but that it increases at our end of the town still, and says how all the town is full of Captain Cox being in some ill condition about prize goods, his goods being taken from him, and I know not what. October 5th. Lay long in bed, talking, among other things, talking of my sister Paul, and my wife of herself is very willing that I should give her 400 L to her portion, and would have her married as soon as we could, but this great sickness time doth make it unfit to send for her up. So I walked through Westminster to my old house, the Swan, and there did pass some time with Sarah, and so down by water to Deptford, and there to my Valentine's. Round about and next door on every side is the plague, but I did not value it, but there did what I would con Ella, and so away to Mr. Eveling's to discourse of our confounded business of prisoners and sick and wounded seamen, wherein he and we are so much put out of order. The bill, blessed be God, is less this week by 740 of what it was the last week. October 7th. But Lord, to think how the poor constable came to me in the dark, going home. Sir, says he, I have the key, and if you would have me do any service for you, send for me betimes tomorrow morning, and I will do what you would have me. Whether the fellow doth this out of kindness or knavery, I cannot tell, but it is pretty to observe. Talking with him in the highway, comes close by the bearers with a dead corpse of the plague. But Lord, to see what custom is, that I am come almost to think nothing of it. October 12th. Good news this week that there are about 600 less dead of the plague than the last, so home to bed. October 13th. The business also of my Tangier accounts to be sent to court is upon my hands in great haste. Besides, all my own proper accounts are in great disorder, having been neglected now above a month, which grieves me, but it could not be settled sooner. These together, and the fear of the sickness and providing for my family, do fill my head very full, besides the infinite business of the office, and nobody here to look after it but myself. So late from my office and my lodgings, and to bed. October 16th. Upon the exchange, which is very empty, God knows, and but mean people there. Thence I walked to the tower, but Lord, how empty the streets are, and melancholy, so many poor sick people in the streets, full of sores, and so many sad stories overheard as I walk, everybody talking of this dead, and that man sick, and so many in this place, and so many in that. And they tell me that in Westminster there is never a physician, and but one apothecary left, all being dead, and that there are great hopes of a decrease this week, God send it. October 31st, up and to the office, where Sir W. Batten met me, and did tell me that Captain Cox Black was dead of the plague, which I had heard of before but took no notice. By and by Captain Cock came to the office, and Sir W. Batten and I did send to him that he would either forbear the office, or forbear going to his own office. However, meeting yesterday the searchers with their rods in their hands coming from his house, I did overhear them say that the fellow did not die of the plague, but he had, I know, been ill a good while, and I am told that his boy Jack is also ill. Thus we end the month merrily, and the more, for that after some fears that the plague would have increased again this week, I hear for certain that there is above 400 decrease, the whole number being 1,388, and of them, of the plague, 1,031. November 4th. They sailed from midnight, and came to Greenwich about 5 o'clock in the morning. I, however, lay till about 7 or 8, and so to my office, my head a little aching, partly for want of natural rest, partly having so much business to do today, and partly from the news I hear, that one of the little boys at my lodging is not well, and they suspect that it may be the plague. November 5th, Lord's Day. Up, and after being trimmed, by boat to the cockpit, where I heard the Duke of Albemarle's chaplain make a simple sermon. Among other things, reproaching the imperfection of humane learning, he cried, "All our physicians can't tell what an egg is, and all our arithmetic is not able to number the days of a man, which, God knows, is not the fault of arithmetic, but that our understandings reach not that thing." To dinner, where a great deal of silly discourse, but the worst is, I hear that the plague increases much at Lambeth, St. Martin's, and Westminster, and fear it will all over the city. November 8th. Thence after dinner to the office again, and thence I am sent for to the King's Head by my Lord Rutherford, who, since I can hope for no more convenience from him, his business is troublesome to me, and there I did leave him as soon as I could, and by water to Deptford, and there did order my matters so, walking up and down the fields till it was dark night, and about 8 at night did take water, being glad I was out of the town, for the plague, it seems, rages there more than ever, and so to my lodgings, where my lord had got a supper, and the mistress of the house, and her daughters, and here stayed Miss Pierce to speak with me about her husband's business, and I made her sup with us, and then at night my lord and I walked with her home, and so back again. November 10th. In the evening news is brought me my wife is come, so I to her, and with her spent the evening, but with no great pleasure, I being vexed about her putting away of Mary in my absence, but yet I took no notice of it at all, but fell into other discourse, and she told me, having herself been this day at my house at London, which was boldly done, to see Mary have her things, that Mr. Harrington our neighbour and East Country merchant is dead at Epsom of the plague. November 12th. After dinner I by water to the Duke of Albemarle, and there had a little discourse and business with him, chiefly to receive his commands about pilots to be got for our Hambros ships, going now at this time of the year convoy to the merchant ships, that have lain at great pain and charge, some 3, some 4 months at Harwich for a convoy. They hope here the plague will be less this week. November 14th. Called up by break of day by Captain Cock by agreement, and he and I in his coach through Kent Street, a sad place through the plague, people sitting sick and with plasters about them in the street, begging, to Viner's and Colville's about money business, and so to my house there, and took 300L, in order to the carrying it down to my Lord Sandwich, in part of the money I am to pay for Captain Cock by our agreement. This day, calling at Mr. Rawlinson's to know how all did there, I hear that my pretty grocer's wife, Miss Beversham, over the way there, her husband is lately dead of the plague at Bow, which I am sorry for fear of losing her neighbourhood. November 15th. The plague, blessed be God, is decreased near 400, making the whole this week but 1,300 and odd, for which the Lord be praised. November 20th. Up before day and wrote some letters to go to my Lord, among others that about W. Howe, which I believe will turn him out, and so took horse for none such, with 2 men with me, and the ways very bad, and the weather worse, for wind and rain. Here I find Mr. Deering come to trouble me about business, which I soon dispatched and parted, he telling me that Llewellyn hath been dead this fortnight, of the plague, in St. Martin's Lane, which much surprised me. November 22nd. I heard this day that Mr. Harrington is not dead of the plague as we believed, at which I was very glad, but most of all to hear that the plague is come very low, that is, the whole under 1,000 and the plague 600 and odd, and great hopes of a further decrease, because of this day's being a very exceeding hard frost, and continues freezing. November 23rd. Up betimes, and so being trimmed, I to get papers ready against Sir H. Cholmley come to me by appointment, he being newly come over from Tangier. It continuing to be a great frost, which gives us hope for a perfect cure of the plague. He and I to walk in the park, and there discoursed with grief of the calamity of the times, how the king's service is performed, and how Tangier is governed by a man who, though honourable, yet doth mind his ways of getting, and little else compared, which will never make the place flourish. November 24th. Up, and after doing some business at the office, I to London, and there, in my way, at my old oyster shop in Gracious Street, bought 2 barrels of my fine woman of the shop, who is alive after all the plague, which now is the first observation or inquiry we make at London concerning everybody we knew before it. November 27th. Our next discourse is upon this act for money, about which Sir G. Carteret comes to see what money can be got upon it, but none can be got, which pleases him the thoughts of, for, if the Exchequer should succeed in this, his office would fail. But I am apt to think at this time of hurry and plague and want of trade, no money will be got upon a new way, which few understand. We walked, Cock and I, through the park with him, and so we being to meet the Vice-Chamberlain tomorrow at Nonsuch, to treat with Sir Robert Long about the same business, I into London, it being dark night, by a hackney coach, the first I have durst to go in many a day, and with great pain now for fear, but it being unsafe to go by water in the dark and frosty cold, and unable being weary with my morning walk to go on foot, this was my only way. Few people yet in the streets, nor shops open, here and there 20 in a place almost, though not above 5 or 6 o'clock at night. November 28th. Took boat and down to Greenwich, Cock and I, he home and I to the office, where did a little business, and then to my lodgings, where my wife is come, and I am well pleased with it, only much trouble in these lodgings we have, the mistress of the house being so deadly dear in everything we have, so that we do resolve to remove home soon, as we know how the plague goes this week, which we hope will be a good decrease. So to bed. November 30th. Great joy we have this week in the weekly bill, it being come to 544 in all, and but 333 of the plague, and that we are encouraged to get to London as soon as we can. And my father writes as great news of joy to them, that he saw York's wagon go again this week to London, and was full of passengers,
and he tells me that my Aunt Bell hath been dead of the plague these 7 weeks. December 13th. Up betimes and finished my journal for 5 days back, and then after being ready to my Lord Brunker by appointment, there to order the disposing of some money that we have come into the office, and here to my great content I did get a bill to imprest to Captain Cock to pay myself in part of what is coming to me from him for my Lord Sandwich's satisfaction and my own, and also another payment or two wherein I am concerned, and having done that did go to Mr. Pierce's, where he and his wife made me drink some tea, and so he and I by water together to London. Here at a tavern in Cornhill, he and I did agree upon my delivering upon to him a bill of Captain Cock's, put into my hands for Pierce's use upon evening of reckonings about the prize goods, and so away to the change, and there hear the ill news, to my great and all our great trouble, that the plague is increased again this week, notwithstanding there hath been a day or two great frosts, but we hope it is only the effects of the late close warm weather, and if the frosts continue the next week, may fall again, but the town do thicken so much with people, that it is much if the plague do not grow again upon us. Thence away to the Pope's Head Tavern, and there met first with Captain Cock, and dispatched my business with him to my content, he being ready to sign his bill of imprest of 2000 L, and gives it me in part of his payment to me, which glads my heart. He being gone, comes Sir W. Warren, who advised with me about several things about getting money, and 100 L I shall presently have of him. We advised about a business of insurance, wherein something may be saved to him and got to me, and to that end he and I did take a coach at night and to the cockpit, there to get the Duke of Albemarle's advice of our insuring some of our sound goods coming home under Harmon's convoy, but he proved shy of doing it without knowledge of the Duke of York. So we back again and calling at my house to see my wife, who is well, though my great trouble is that our poor little parish is the greatest number this week in all the city within the walls, having 6, from 1 the last week. December 17th. After dinner back again and to Deptford to Mr. Evelyn's, who was not within, but I had appointed my cousin Thomas Pepys of Hatcham to meet me there, to discourse about getting his 1000 L of my Lord Sandwich, having now an opportunity of my having above that sum in my hands of his. I found this a dull fellow still in all his discourse, but in this he is ready enough to embrace what I counsel to him, which is, to write importunately to my lord and me about it, and I will look after it. I do again and again declare myself a man unfit to be security for such a sum. He walked with me as far as Deptford Upper Town, being mighty respectful to me, and there parted, he telling me that this town is still very bad of the plague. December 20th. But 2 things trouble me. 1, the sickness is increased above 80 this week, though in my own parish not one has died, though 6 the last week. The other, most of all, which is, that I have so complex an account for these last 2 months for a variety of layings out upon Tangier, occasions and variety of gettings, that I have not made even with myself now these 3 or 4 months, which do trouble me mightily, finding that I shall hardly ever come to understand them thoroughly again, as I used to do my accounts when I was at home. December 22nd. The weather hath been frosty these 8 or 9 days, and so we hope for an abatement of the plague the next week, or else God have mercy upon us, for the plague will certainly continue the next year if it doth not. December 27th. Up and with Cock, by coach to London, there home to my wife, and angry about her desiring a maid yet, before the plague is quite over. It seems Mercer is troubled that she hath not one unto her, but I will not venture my family by increasing it before it be safe. So to Captain Cock's, and there sat and talked, especially with his counsellor, about his prize goods, that hath done him good turn, being of the company with Captain Fisher, his name Gotterson. Here I supped, and so home to bed, with great content that the plague is decreased to 152, the whole being but 330. December 31st. It is true we have gone through great melancholy because of the great plague, and I put to great charges by it, by keeping my family long at Woolwich, and myself and another part of my family, my clerks, at my charge in Greenwich, and a maid at London. I have never lived so merrily, besides that I never got so much, as I have done this plague time, by my Lord Brunker's and Captain Cock's good company, and the acquaintance of Miss Nip, Coleman and her husband, and Mr. Lanier, and great store of dancings we have had at my cost, which I was willing to indulge myself and wife, at my lodgings. My whole family hath been well all this while, and all my friends I know of, saving my Aunt Bell, who is dead, and some children of my cousin Sarah's, of the plague, but many of such as I know very well, dead. Yet to our great joy the town fills apace, and shops begin to be open again. Pray God, continue the plague's decrease, for that keeps the court away from the place of business, and so all goes to wrack as to public matters, they at this distance not thinking of it. January 3rd, 1966. Up and all the morning till 3 in the afternoon examining and fitting up my purser's paper, and so sent it away by an express. Then comes my wife, and I set her to get supper ready, against I go to the Duke of Albemarle, and back again, and at the Duke's, with great joy, I received the good news of the decrease of the plague this week to 70, and but 253 in all, which is the least bill hath been known these last 20 years in the city, though the want of people in London is it that must make it so low, below the ordinary number for bills. January 6th. At night home to my lodging, where I find my wife returned with my things, and there also Captain Ferrers is come upon business of my lord's to this town, about getting some goods of his put on board in order to his going to Spain, and Ferrers presumes upon my finding a bed for him, which I did not like to have done without my invitation, because I had done it several times before, during the plague, that he could not provide himself safely elsewhere. January 9th. Up and then to the office, where we met first since the plague, which God preserve us in. At noon home to dinner, where Uncle Tom is with me, and in comes Pierce, lately come from Oxford, and Ferrers. January 10th. Thence to the Change, and there hear, to our grief, how the plague is increased this week from 70 to 89. January 13th. Home with his lordship to Miss Williams, in Covent Garden, to dinner, the first time I ever was there, and there met Captain Cock, and pretty merry, though not perfectly so, because of the fear that there is of a great increase again of the plague this week. And again my Lord Brunker do tell us, that he hath it from Sir John Barber, who is related to my Lord Craven, that my Lord Craven do look after Sir G. Carteret's place, and do reckon himself sure of it. After dinner, Cock and I together by coach to the Exchange, in our way talking of our matters, and do conclude that everything must break in pieces, while no better counsels govern matters than theirs seem to do, and that it will become him and I and all men to get their reckonings even, as soon as they can, and expect all to break. Besides, if the plague continues among us another year, the Lord knows what will become of us. January 16th. So home late at my letters, and so to bed, being mightily troubled at the news of the plague's being increased, and was much the saddest news that the plague hath brought me from the beginning of it, because of the lateness of the year, and the fear, we may with reason have, of its continuing with us the next summer, the total being now 375, and the plague 158. January 22nd. To the Crown Tavern behind the Exchange by appointment, and there met the first meeting of Gresham College since the plague. Dr. Goddard did fill us with talk in defense of his and his fellow physicians going out of town in the plague time, saying that their particular patients were most gone out of town, and they left at liberty, and a great deal more, &c. But what, among other fine discourse, pleased me most, was Sir G. Ent about respiration, that it is not to this day known or concluded on among physicians, nor to be done either, how that action is managed by nature or for what use it is. January 23rd. Up and to the office and then to dinner. After dinner to the office again all the afternoon, and much business with me. Good news beyond all expectation of the decrease of the plague, being now but 79, and the whole but 272. So home with comfort to bed. A most furious storm all night and morning. January 29th. So I took a book, and into the gardens and there walked and read till dark, with great pleasure, and then in comes Osborne and he and I to talk, and Mr. Jaggard, who came from London, and great hopes there is of a decrease this week also of the plague. January 30th. This is the first time I have been in this church since I left London for the plague, and it frighted me indeed to go through the church, more than I thought it could have done, to see so many graves lie so high upon the churchyard, where people have been buried of the plague. I was much troubled at it, and do not think to go through it again a good while. January 31st. Thence to the Duke of Albemarle, who tells me Mr. Coventry is come to town, and directs me to go to him about some business in hand. Whether out of displeasure or desire of ease, I know not. But I asked him not the reason of it, but went to Whitehall, but could not find him there. though to my great joy people begin to bustle up and down there, the king holding his resolution to be in town tomorrow, and hath good encouragement, blessed be God, to do so, the plague being decreased this week to 56, and the total to 227. February 1st. Up into the office, were all the morning till late, and Mr. Coventry with us, the first time since before the plague, then hearing my wife was gone abroad to buy things and see her mother and father, whom she hath not seen since before the plague, and no dinner provided for me ready. I walked to Captain Cox, knowing my Lord Brunker dined there, and there very merry, and a good dinner. February 4th, Lord's Day, and my wife and I the first time together at church since the plague, and now only because of Mr. Mills his coming home to preach his first sermon, expecting a great excuse for his leaving the parish before anybody went, and now staying till are all come home. But he made but a very poor and short excuse, and a bad sermon. At supper my wife tells me that W. Joyce hath been with her this evening, the first time since the plague, and tells her my Aunt James is lately dead of the stone, and what she hath given to his and his brother's wife and my cousin Sarah. February 5th, up and with Sir W. Batten, at whose lodgings calling for him, I saw his lady the first time since her coming to town since the plague, having absented myself designedly to shew some discontent, and that I am not at all the more suppliant because of my Lord Sandwich's fall, to my Lord Brunker's, to see whether he goes to the Duke's this morning or no. February 7th. It being fast day, I stayed at home all day long to set things to rights in my chamber, by taking out all my books and putting my chamber in the same condition it was before the plague. But in the morning, doing of it and knocking up a nail, I did bruise my left thumb, so as broke a great deal of my flesh off, that it hung by a little. It was a sight frightened my wife, but I put some balsam of Miss Turner's to it, and though in great pain, yet went on with my business, and did it to my full content, setting everything in order, in hopes now that the worst of our fears are over as to the plague for the next year. February 9th, thence to Westminster to the Exchequer about my Tanger business, to get orders for tallies, and so to the Hall, where the first day of the term, and the Hall very full of people, and much more than was expected, considering the plague that hath been. February 10th, this day comes first Sir Thomas Harvey after the plague, having been out of town all this while. He was coldly received by us, and he went away before we rose also, to make himself appear yet a man less necessary. February 12th, up and very busy to perform an oath in finishing my journal this morning for 7 or 8 days past. Then to several people attending upon business, among others, Mr. Grant and the executors of Barlow, for the 25L due for the quarter before he died, which I scruple to pay, being obliged but to pay every half year. Then comes Mr. Caesar, my boy's lute master, whom I have not seen since the plague before, but he hath been in Westminster all this while very well, and tells me how, in the height of it, how bold people there were to go in sport to one another's burials, and in spite to well people would breathe in the faces, out of their windows, of well people going by. February 13th. Ill news this night that the plague is increased this week, and in many places else about the town, and at Chatham and elsewhere. February 16th. With more to the coffee house, the first time I have been there, where very full, and company it seems hath been there all the plague time. February 20th. And I this day on this occasion drank a glass of wine, which I have not professedly done these 2 years I think, but a little in the time of the sickness. After that done, and gone and kissed the mother in bed, I away to Westminster Hall, and there hear that Miss Lane is come to town. So I stayed loitering up and down, till anon she comes and agreed to meet at Swain's, and there I went anon and she came, but stayed but little. The place not being private, I have not seen her since before the plague. So to bed, a little troubled that I have been at 2 houses this afternoon with Miss Lane that were formerly shut up of the plague. February 21st, thence with my Lord Brunker to Gresham College, the first time after the sickness that I was there, and the second time any met. February 22nd, we are much troubled that the sickness in general, the town being so full of people, should be up by 3, and yet of the particular disease of the plague, there should be 10 increase. March 1st, up into the office and there all morning sitting, and at noon to dinner with my Lord Brunker, Sir W. Batten, and Sir W. Penn at the White Horse in Lombard Street, where, God forgive us, good sport with Captain Cox having his maid sick of the plague a day or 2 ago, and sent to the pest house, where she now is, but he will not say anything but that she is well. But, blessed be God, a good bill this week we have, being but 237 in all, and 47 of the plague, and of them but 6 in the city, though my Lord Brunker says that these sick are most of them in new parishes, where they were not the last week. March 12th, up betimes, and called on by abundance of people about business, and then away by water to Westminster, and there to the Exchequer about some business, and thence by coach calling at several places, to the Old Exchange, and there did much business, and so homeward, and bought a silver salt for my ordinary table to use, and so home to dinner, and after dinner comes my uncle and Aunt White. The latter I have not seen since the plague. A silly, froward, ugly woman she is. We made mighty much of them, and she talks mightily of her fear of the sickness, and so a deal of tittle-tattle, and I left them, and to my office where late, and so home to supper and to bed. This day I hear my uncle Talbot Pepys died the last week, and was buried. March 13th, the plague increased this week 29 from 28, though the total fallen from 238 to 207, which do never a whit please me. March 14th, thence to walk all alone in the fields behind Gray's Inn, making an end of reading over my dear Faber Fortunae of my Lord Bacon's, and thence, it growing dark, took 2 or 3 wanton turns about the idle places and lanes about Drury Lane, but to no satisfaction, but a great fear of the plague among them, and so anon I walked by invitation to Miss Pierce's, where I find much good company, that is to say, Miss Pierce, my wife, Miss Worship and her daughter, and Harris the player and Nip, and my wife and Mercer, and Miss Barbary Sheldon, who is come this day to spend a week with my wife. March 18th, so walked to Westminster, very fine fair dry weather, but all cry out for lack of rain, to Herbert's and drank, and thence to Miss Martin's, and did what I would with her, her husband going for some wine for us. The poor man I do think would take pains if I can get him a purser's place, which I will endeavour. She tells me as a secret that Betty Howlett of the Hall, my little sweetheart, that I used to call my second wife, is married to a younger son of Mr. Mitchell's, his elder brother, who should have had her, being dead this plague, at which I am glad, and that they are to live near me in Thames Street, by the Old Swan. March 22nd, the plague increased 4 this week, which troubles me, though but 1 in the whole. March 23rd, thence I to Westminster to the Chequer about a little business, and then to the Swan, and there sent for a bit of meat and dined, and after dinner had opportunity of being pleased with Sarah, and so away to Westminster Hall, and there Miss Mitchell tells me with great joy how little Betty Howlett is married to her young son Mitchell, which is a pretty odd thing, that he should so soon succeed in that match to his elder brother, that died of the plague, and to the house and trade intended for him. And more, they say that the girl hath heretofore said that she did love this little one more than the older brother that was intended her all along. I'm glad of this match, and more, that they are likely to live near me in Thames Street, where I may see Betty now and then, whom I from a girl did used to call my second wife, and mighty pretty she is. April 5th, the plague is, to our grief, increased to 9 this week, though decreased a few in the total, and this increase runs through many parishes, which makes us many fear the next year. April 8th, the court full this morning of the news of Tom Cheffin's death, the king's closet keeper. He was well last night as ever, playing at tables in the house, and not very ill this morning, 6 o'clock, yet dead before 7. They think of an imposthume in his breast. But it looks fearfully among people nowadays, the plague, as we hear, increasing everywhere again. April 9th, thence by coach to Miss Pierce's, and with her and Nip and Miss Pierce's boy and girl abroad, thinking to have been merry at Chelsea, but being come almost to the house by coach near the waterside, a house alone, I think the Swan, a gentleman walking by called to us to tell us that the house was shut up of the sickness. April 10th, bad news that the plague is decreased in the general again, and 2 increased in the sickness. April 22nd, thence walked wearily as far as Fleet Street, and so there met a coach and home to supper and to bed, having sat a great while with Will Joyce, who come to see me, and it is the first time I have seen him at my house since the plague, and find him the same impertinent, prating coxcomb that ever he was. April 23rd, the plague, I hear, increases in the town much, and exceedingly in the country everywhere. April 25th, the plague, blessed be God, is decreased 16 this week. May 12th, the plague increases in many places, and is 53 this week with us. June 6th, up betimes and vexed with my people for having a key taken out of the chamber doors and nobody knew where it was, as also with my boy for not being ready as soon as I, though I called him, whereupon I boxed him soundly, and then to my business at the office and on the victualling office, and thence by water to St. James, whither he, the Duke of York, is now gone, it being a monthly fast day for the plague. June 13th. So we left the church and crowd, and I home, being set down on Tower Hill, and there did a little business, and then in the evening went down by water to Deptford, it being very late, and there I stayed out as much time as I could, and then took boat again homeward, but the officers being gone in, returned and walked to Miss Bagwell's house, and there, it being by this time pretty dark and past 10 o'clock, went into her house and did what I would. But I was not a little fearful of what she told me but now, which is, that her servant was dead of the plague, that her coming to me yesterday was the first day of her coming forth, and that she had new whitened the house all below stairs, but that above stairs they are not so fit for me to go up to, they being not so. So I parted thence with a very good will, but very civil, and away to the water side, and sent for a pint of sack and so home, drank what I would and gave the watermen the rest, and so adieu. Home about 12 at night, and so to bed, finding most of my people gone to bed. July 4th, up and visited very betimes by Mr. Shepley, who is come to town upon business from Hinchingbrook, where he left all well. I out, and walked along with him as far as Fleet Street, it being a fast day, the usual fast for the plague, and few coaches to be had. Thanks be to God, the plague is, as I hear, increased but 2 this week. But in the country in several places it rages mightily, and particularly in Colchester, where it hath long been, and is believed will quite depopulate the place. August 6th. So home, and in Fanchurch Street met with Mr. Battersby. Says he, "Do you see Dan Rawlinson's door shut up?" Which I did, and wondered. "Why," says he, "after all the sickness, and himself spending all the last year in the country, one of his men is now dead of the plague, and his wife and one of his maids sick, and himself shut up, which troubles me mightily." So home, and there do hear also from Miss Sarah Daniel that Greenwich is at this time much worse than ever it was, and Deptford too, and she told us that they believed all the town would leave the town and come to London, which is now the receptacle of all the people from all infected places. God preserve us. August 9th. In the evening to Lombard Street about money, to enable me to pay Sir G. Carteret's 3000 L, which he hath lodged in my hands, in behalf of his son and my Lady Jemima, toward their portion, which, I thank God, I am able to do at a minute's warning. In my way I inquired, and find Miss Rawlinson is dead of the sickness, and her maid continues mighty ill. He himself is got out of the house. I met also with Mr. Evelyn in the street, who tells me the sad condition at this very day at Deptford for the plague, and more at Deal, within his precinct as one of the commissioners for sick and wounded seamen, that the town is almost quite depopulated. August 17th. Sir John Minns come home tonight not well, from Chatham, where he hath been at pay, holding it at Upnor Castle, because of the plague, so much in the town of Chatham. He hath, they say, got an egg, being so much on the water. September 13th. Up and down to Tower Wharf, and there with Balty and labourers from Deptford did get my goods housed well at home. So down to Deptford again to fetch the rest, and there eat a bit of dinner at the Globe, with the maester of the Bazan with me, while the labourers went to dinner. Here I hear that this poor town doth bury still of the plague 7 or 8 in a day. October 29th. About 5 o'clock I took my wife, who is mighty fine, and with a new fair pair of locks, which vex me, though like a fool I helped her the other night to buy them, and to Miss Pierce's, and there staying a little. I away before to Whitehall, and into the new playhouse there, the first time I ever was there, and the first play I have seen since before the great plague. November 20th. By and by Sir W. Warren, and with him half an hour discoursing of several businesses, and some I hope will bring me a little profit. He gone, and Shepley, I to the office a little, and then to church, it being Thanksgiving Day for the cessation of the plague. But Lord, how the town do say that it is hastened before the plague is quite over, there dying some people still, but only to get ground for plays to be publicly acted, which the bishops would not suffer till the plague was over, and one would think so, by the suddenness of the notice given of the day, which was last Sunday, and the little ceremony, the sermon being dull of Mr. Minns, and people with great indifferency come to hear him. November 30th, thence to Westminster Hall and the Abbey, thinking, as I had appointed, to have met Miss Burrows there, but not meeting her, I home and just overtook my cousin Roger Pepys, Miss Turner, Dyke, and Joyce Norton, coming by invitation to dine with me. These ladies I have not seen since before the plague. December 7th, so away after dinner, leaving my wife and her, and by water to the Strand, and so to the King's Playhouse, where 2 acts were almost done when I came in, and there I sat with my cloak about my face, and saw the remainder of The Maid's Tragedy, a good play, and well acted, especially by the younger Marshall, which is become a pretty good actor, and is the first play I have seen in either of the houses since before the Great Plague, they having acted now about 14 days publicly. January 18th, 1667. Then all the rest of the morning and after a mouthful of dinner, all the afternoon in my closet till night, sorting all my papers which have lain unsorted for all the time we were at Greenwich during the plague, which did please me also, I drawing on to put my office into a good posture, though much is behind. April 4th. My Lady Duchess, among other things, discoursed of the wisdom of dividing the fleet, which the general said nothing to, though he knows well that it comes from themselves in the fleet, and was brought up hither by Sir Edward Spragg. Colonel Howard, asking how the prince did, the Duke of Albemarle answering, "Pretty well," the other replied, "but not so well as to go to sea again." "How?" says the Duchess. "What should he go for, if he were well, for there are no ships for him to command?" "And so you have brought your hogs to a fair market," said she. It was pretty to hear the Duke of Albemarle himself to wish that they would come on our ground, meaning the French, for that he would pay them, so as to make them glad to go back to France again, which was like a general, but not like an admiral. One at the table told an odd passage in this late plague, that at Petersfield, I think, he said, one side of the street had every house almost infected through the town, and the other not one shut up. May 1st. Thence away to the King's Playhouse, by agreement met Sir W. Penn, and saw Love in a Maze, but a sorry play, only Lacey's clown's part, which he did most admirably indeed, and I am glad to find the rogue at liberty again. Here was but little, and that ordinary, company. We sat at the upper bench next to the boxes, and I find it do pretty well, and have the advantage of seeing and hearing the great people, which may be pleasant when there is good store. Now it was only Prince Rupert and my Lord Lauderdale, and my lord, the naming of whom puts me in mind of my seeing, at Sir Robert Viner's, 2 or 3 great silver flagons, made with inscriptions as gifts of the king to such and such persons of quality as did stay in town the late great plague, for the keeping things in order in the town, which is a handsome thing. August 28th. After christening comes Sir W. Batten, Sir W. Penn, and Mr. Lowther, and mighty merry there, and I forfeited for not kissing the 2 godmothers presently after the christening, before I kissed the mother, which made good mirth, and so anon away, and my wife and I took coach and went twice round Bartholomew Fair, which I was glad to see again, after 2 years missing it by the plague, and so home and to my chamber a little, and so to supper and to bed. September 25th. At noon I took coach, and to Sir G. Carteret's, in Lincoln's Inn Fields, to the house that is my lord's, which my lord lets him have, and this is the first day of dining there. And there dined with him and his lady my Lord Privy Seal, who is indeed a very sober man, who, among other talk, did mightily wonder at the reason of the growth of the credit of bonkers, since it is so ordinary a thing for citizens to break, out of knavery. Upon this we had much discourse, and I observed therein, to the honour of this city, that I have not heard of one citizen of London broke in all this war, this plague, this fire, and this coming up of the enemy among us, which he owned to be very considerable. October 8th. Saunders, the only violin in my time, is, I hear, dead of the plague in the late plague there. October 21st. Up and betimes got a coach at the Exchange, and thence to St. James, where I had forgot that the Duke of York and family were gone to Whitehall, and thence to Westminster Hall, and there walked a little, finding the Parliament likely to be busy all this morning about the business of Mr. Brunker for advising Cox and Harman to shorten sail when they were in pursuit of the Dutch after the first great victory. I went away to Mr. Creed's chamber, there to meet Sir H. Cholmley, about business of Mr. Yeabsley, where I was delivered of a great fear that they would question some of the orders for payment of money, which I had got them signed at the time of the plague, when I was here alone, but all did pass.